so glad you're here tonight. I'm Kim Thomas, and I'm the curate here at the Village Chapel, and welcome to our first creative thinking event here at the Village Chapel. Our mission for these gatherings is to inspire, inform, and encourage creative thinking from a biblical perspective. We'll have artists of various mediums dialogue with us about this over the next year in hopes of engaging you on several topics, including things like the imagination, creativity, what is art, what is beauty, and why is all of this important? Irish poet Seamus Heaney spoke of a music you never would have known to listen for in his poem, The Rain Stick. In many mediums of communication, the purveyor of truth and beauty, pain and struggle wrestles with how to assess and express the whole in the fragment or the aspects of an infinite God revealed in the finite creation. The artist, in particular, has this unique vocation of enabling people to see what they can't otherwise see. And as N.T. Wright has put it, to see that the world is already full of the glory of God and that it will one day be filled yet fuller. Our guest this evening is one such artist. His work spans a wide crescendo of excellence, from portraiture to sculptures to expressive mixed media pieces. Ross Wilson is one of Northern Ireland's leading artists and sculptors, considered by many to be one of the most relevant and collectible artists of his generation. His work has sold at both Christie's and Sotheby's London, and he's been a visiting speaker at Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. The National Portrait Gallery London was once also a guest speaker at the President's National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. Perhaps he'll tell us which president that was. He's also my good friend, and I look forward to hearing him as he speaks about the inspiration for his C.S. Lewis Centenary Sculpture, The Searcher, in East Belfast. I love that even on his way here today, he shared about that with the woman sitting next to him on the plane and engaged her for her grandchildren to read the books of Narnia. So, if you will welcome Ross with me tonight. And by the way, after Ross finishes, I'll come up and chat with him a bit, and we'll have some time for your questions. He looks forward to that part, he said.
Yeah. I'll not mention the president whose breakfast I was at, because it might split the room, but his his surname begins with T, and it ends with P. I think, yeah. Anyway. Does anybody want to make a guess? No. Okay. The name that shall not be spoken. It's a great honor to be here tonight. I feel, always when I come to do something like this, a real big sense of imposter syndrome, and Kim's introduction. Yes, all those things did happen, but it's about now, today, and about what we can do with what we've been given to do. And those things that you achieve in life are important, but it's about what you're becoming, what each of us here are becoming, not just what our identity is, but what we're becoming in our identity, and that's a becoming in Christ. And I'd like to I hate that expression when people say, we're just going to pray, just going to read a piece of scripture. That's the wrong thing to say. We're going to look at God's glorious word and look at a verse in 1 Ephesians, and it's chapter 1, verse 18, and I'll just read it out. I'm going to read it out. I pray also that your eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope which he has called you to, the riches of his glorious inheritance in the saints. And that's a really important piece of scripture. John Ruskin, the Victorian art critic, sort of paraphrased it by saying that we do not see with the lens of the eye, we merely see through it. We see with the soul of the eye. And that's about seeing things And seeing things is a spiritual experience because we see through light. And light is something that is part of God's creation, part of what makes us who we are, part of what helps us to see what we should be seeing. And I'm going to look at, this is like a story tonight about the idea of enlightenment in terms of grace and how grace can impact someone's life, how grace has impacted our lives, how grace has brought us to this point. And it's this idea of grace exchange. So the idea that we've been given grace and we have to give that grace on, we have to pass it on. And I just happen to be an artist and sculptor. That's no different from being a mother or a grandmother or a grandfather or someone who works in a car shop. We all have that responsibility, whatever orbit of life we find ourselves in or what influence we have, because everybody in this room has a unique orbit of influence. You will touch people's lives that I can never touch. And I will touch people's lives that you can't touch. So what I do is no more important than what you do. And often I look at what I've done and think it's not good enough. It's never quite good enough. So in Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis wrote that he was the product of good parents, good food, and a garden. And Walter Hooper, a friend and writer and commentator, said this on C.S. Lewis. Lewis struck me as the most thoroughly converted man I'd ever met. Christianity was never for him a separate department of life. His whole vision of life was such that the natural and the supernatural seemed always to be combined. So C.S. Lewis lived a Christ-shaped life. For him, grace was a power for living, a power for obedience. Grace was a divine influence which operated within him. That same grace operates within us and should be reflected in our daily, day-to-dayness of life, as it was in the life of C.S. Lewis. Grace is the love of God shown to the unloved, the peace of God given to the restless. The American writer Anne Lamott makes this observation on grace. I do not understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. As grace receivers, we are to become grace givers. And we must spell out the alphabet of grace day by day in our lives, in our actions, in our being, in our becoming more Christ-like. Theology had a cosmic significance for Lewis. Theology was not just something known, it was something lived. It was something experienced. It was a three-dimensional living thing, not just mere ideas for Lewis, but it was embodied into his experience of daily life, into the narrative of his life. And that was necessary for Lewis. For Lewis, theology was not just knowledge about God, it was knowing God. It was not just sentences or ideas. Lewis did not just quote a verse, he lived the verse. And we too are called to be the verse. Theology is not just to be knowledge about knowledge, it is to be lived. And C.S. Lewis did not just hang clothes in the wardrobe, he hung great ideas of sacrifice, redemption, victory, and freedom for the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve. Great ideas that are commonplace. Revelation within something that looks ordinary on the outside. Revelation through investigation. And we should never stop looking. Some of the greatest things can be found in the most ordinary of places, like a wardrobe. The Irish poet, W.B. Yeats. Sorry, Kim, you got in before me there with Yeats. The Irish poet W.B. Yeats wrote, "By logic and reason we die hourly. By imagination we live." By logic and reason we die hourly, by imagination we live. Seamus Heaney, the Irish Nobel laureate, wrote, "Believe that a further shore is reachable from here." And C.S. Lewis points us to that other shore. And he encourages us through his imagination, which was grace given, to move further up and further in. So I'm now going to do a little investigation into this project, which happened 25 years ago this year. And it was a big thing for me. to be involved in this. And it was inspired by a letter that was written to a 10-year-old girl in 1961. And it was written to a young girl called Anne Waller. And her father was a chicken farmer in Suffolk in England. And she'd been reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and became very upset when she got to the point where Aslan gave himself up, where he laid down his life for the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve. And she asked her mum, why did this great lion do this? Why did this brave lion do this? And her mum didn't know. Her mum didn't have a clue. Her mum wasn't a believer. And her mum but did have the sense to say, why don't you write to the person who wrote the book? So she wrote to C.S. Lewis. And Lewis actually wrote back to her. And that was the thing that inspired the sculpture. So the idea of this man, like a very renowned professor, sitting down to write to a 10-year-old child and to take the time to do that was a perfect example of grace exchange, where he knew the importance of that grace going into that young life. And Lewis did that, and that changed that young girl's life. So this is a little sketch at the way back, but it's this idea of what God wants from us. And a lot of us think that we can give God something, when really God just wants us. And then he's going to give us what we need. And then we become what we should be. This is a map. If you look at the left-hand side, you'll see that's the kilns in Oxford where Lewis lived. Just over here. Should be able to pick that up. And if you look at where the red dot is on the upper right, that's Whipsnade Zoo. Okay, and this zoo had just opened in the spring of 28. And Lewis and Morney set off to visit the zoo. And they set off in a sidecar motorcycle. And Morney was driving the motorcycle. Jack was in the sidecar. I'm not sure. I'm sure people here have read Surprised by Joy. In the last chapter, Lewis talks about his conversion to Christianity. In the previous chapter, he talked about his conversion to theism, which happened on the upper deck of a double-decker bus. So these conversions had motorized elements to them, and in a way, there was an engine involved, and that engine was the engine of God's grace that pulled Lewis to this position. So if you look at that map, it takes about. Thank you so much. If you look at the map, that's the distance that Lewis travelled that day, and it's approximately 40 miles. Okay, and they left at 11:15 in the morning. And Lewis records in Surprised by Joy, when we set out, it was a misty, foggy morning, but halfway through the journey, the fog and the mist lifted. When I left the kilns, I did not know that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. When I reached the zoo, I believed that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. So what happened on that journey? What happened between that starting point and that end point? Well, that all began to happen way before that particular day. And as Lewis records as well, he said that the great angler had his hook in my mouth for years, and he was being pulled in. Obviously, J.J.R. Tolkien and some of the other Inklings had an influence on Lewis. The conversation that Tolkien had with Lewis on Addison's Walk a few years before this, where Tolkien challenged Lewis to think about the idea of myth and the idea that there is truth in myth at the core of myths, and the idea of a God who would give up part of himself for you. And Lewis said, that's a really amazing story, but it's a myth. And Tolkien said, well, this myth is different from all other myths. This myth is actually true. And as he said that, Lewis records this, a gust of wind came upon his back and blew the leaves off the tree. It was a cosmic metaphysical moment of grace. And that was the first dart of faith that got past Lewis's defense mechanism and into his mind, his heart, his whole being. So other people were at play in Lewis's life, using their grace that they'd been given and exchanging it with C.S. Lewis. This is a very rare photograph that I found recently of C.S. Lewis in a candid shot, not usually what you'd see him like as the scholar, but he's on the beach with his favourite dog. And this is Mr. Papworth, or the Baron, as he called him. And the Baron has a part to play on the day that Lewis was converted, because he came along to the zoo as well. But he was in a car behind the motorcycle and sidecar. And in Surprised by Joy, Lewis talks about staying outside the zoo to look after the dog while Warnie and his friends went inside. So I found that photograph recently. It's really, it was so obscure and such a deep dive into a rabbit hole, I can't even remember where I found it. I tried to get back to it, but thankfully I'd screenshot it on my iPad. And I've done a series of paintings of a close-up of his head since then. But that's his favourite dog. I think he had about 8 dogs throughout his life, but Mr. Papworth was his favourite dog. So this is the kilns, the sign outside the house. This is not Jack and Warnie, but it's a very similar kind of motorcycle from that period, from 1931. That's the day, the year this all happened, the 28th of September 1931. And you'll see a brochure there to the zoo. It opened in the spring of that year. And you'll see a monkey there driving a car with 2 zoo guards in it. That would never happen today. There'd be an inquiry. But also you can see on the hill there above Whipsnade a lion carved into the landscape, which is quite symbolic. And you'll also see a little photograph of a bear, which took me years to find. And in Surprised by Joy, Warnie comes out of the zoo, Jack's with Mr. Papworth, and he's sort of been falling asleep, and he wakens up and realizes that he's also woken into his salvation. But Warnie comes out and says, Jack, you need to go in. There's a little bear in there. It salutes for buns. And they went in, and Jack loved it. And they actually went back the next week to see the bear again. And I could never find a photograph. And a friend of mine, Jerry Root from Wheaton College, has been searching for that photograph for about 30 years. And I did a thing a few years back, and he came to it, and he's written 7 books on C.S. Lewis, and he's sitting in the front row of a talk I'm doing, and I know nothing. And I bring up this, and Jerry Roots, he lights up in the seat, and I thought, what did I say? I must have said something really profound. But it was the photograph of Mr. The little bear, Mr. Bultitude, and he said, where did you get that? I've been looking for that for decades. And he said, can I have that to use in my... I said, Jerry, just see me afterwards. I'm, talk about it. So that was the one thing I had on Jerry Root, who's like an amazing, like, Lewis scholar. So this is the little girl when she was about 11 years old, and she received the letter when she was 10 years old. And this, you can see like the chicken farm in the background. And her name is Anne Waller. And she's the little girl with the C.S. Lewis. And this is a quotation by Lewis, which is really important, that we have to think about this as well. My task was therefore simply that of a translator, turning Christian doctrine into a language that people would attend to and could understand. And so Lewis did that with this letter that he sent to that little girl. And the letter, people have written books about what the meaning of the Narnia existence is and what the meaning of all the books are. But Lewis explains it in a paragraph to a 10-year-old child. And this is the envelope. And I was able to contact that little girl. This is going back to 1997. It was the centenary of Lewis's birth the following year. And Keith and I wanted to do something to celebrate C.S. Lewis's centenary. And there was nothing happening. There was a blue plaque being unveiled in the building. We went to a Christie lecture at Queen's University and fell asleep almost. It was so boring. And we thought we needed to do something. So Keith thought, I'm going to write a musical on C.S. Lewis's life. And I thought, yeah, that's okay. That's good. Yeah, go ahead, do that. And then Keith knew as a strategist that both of us had to get past Douglas Gresham. I'm not sure if you know Douglas Gresham. He's C.S. Lewis's stepson. So he controls the Lewis estate. So Keith made him a co-writer of the musical. And I was in the door as well. And then Douglas showed me this letter in his study. And I read the letter. And it was a cosmic moment where basically my whole body tingled and the hairs stood in the back of my neck. I thought, wow, this is unbelievable. And when I read the letter, this is the actual letter, which is now in the special collections at Queen's University in Belfast. And this is him replying to Anne on the 5th of March. But you'll notice, maybe you can't see it very well there, but that stamp has a franking mark, which is Cambridge. And Lewis was teaching at Cambridge in the last years of his life. So he posted that from Cambridge, not Oxford. So the day that Anne received the letter on the farm, her mum came and knocked the bedroom door. It was a Saturday morning, and came in and said, "Who do you know in Cambridge?" And she opened the letter. I traced Anne after like about 3 or 4 days, just through telephone connections and directory inquiries. And I phoned her up and I said, "Did you write to C.S. Lewis when you were 10 years old?" She said, "Who is this?" I said, "Sorry, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm wanting to do a project and I saw a copy of this letter." She said, "That letter hasn't been published." I said, "But it was just a photocopy that someone sent to somebody else who sent it on to Douglas Gresham. And I'm wondering, could I use that letter as a starting point for sculpture?" And she said, that would be a great idea. That's the best news I've heard all year." I said, "What was it like when you received the letter?" She said, "My mum came to the bedroom door, came in. 'Who do you know in Cambridge?' I opened and read the letter. I couldn't believe it. I carried the letter in my pocket for 2 years. Mr. Lewis helped me find my faith." And like, I just, was breaking up I couldn't believe it. It was profound. Mr. Lewis helped me find my faith because of this letter. He sat down and wrote to this kid, this little girl, and explained something that she was concerned about. The idea of why someone would give himself up to free others. It's obviously a parallel of the gospel. And here's what Lewis said. I'll read a section of it. "The whole Narnian story is about Christ. That is to say, I asked myself, supposing there really was or were a world like Narnia, and supposing it had, like our world, gone wrong, and supposing Christ wanted to go into that world and save it, as he did ours, what might have happened? The stories are my answer. Since Narnia is a world of talking beasts, I thought he would become a talking beast there as he became a man here. I pictured him becoming a lion because a lion there because A, the lion is supposed to be the king of the beasts. B, Christ is called the Lion of Judah in the Bible. And C, I'd been having strange dreams about lions when I began writing the books. The whole series works out like this. Lewis did have a really good sense of humor. So you can see the abbreviations for each book in just one line. So there, it's all there. And that's considered now the pivotal letter that is the key to opening the mystery of Narnia. And he did it in basically a paragraph on, half an A4 sheet, back and forward. So that's how powerful that was. So that letter affected me. So this is Anne when she's now in 1998 when the sculpture was unveiled, and she came with the letter. And when I made the sculpture, I put the letter on the back of the wardrobe. You can see it in the background there. And I made an extra copy and gave her the letter in bronze because she triggered this whole thing off. And she triggered that grace exchange by inquiring. And Lewis took up the inquiry and put the grace into the response. So this is the sculpture in East Belfast. And it was 1998. And there was no money for the sculpture. The first donator to the sculpture was my little niece, who's now 30. And she gave me £5.50 from her piggy bank. And it really broke my heart. She was such a sweet little girl and so trusting. And she came and said, "Uncle Ross, I want to give you this to start the fund off." And it really touched my heart. And I went to Belfast City Council and asked them to make a donation to this. And they said, "How much is this project going to cost?" I said, "Well, it's going to cost doing the sculpture." This is 25 years ago. Costs a lot more now. And the landscaping, it's going to cost about £80,000. And he said, "How much money have you got in place?" I said, £5.50. He said, "Right, £5.50. Well, where'd you get that?" I said, my niece gave it to me from her piggy bank. "Right, okay, well, we'd be interested in financing this. We could give you 80% of the funding from the lottery." And I said, "I know you're going to think this is really weird and odd, but I actually couldn't accept that because I think Lewis would start to spin very fast in his grave He wouldn't like that. And people wouldn't understand, why that would be connected with this. This is about a different thing altogether. He said, are you serious? You're refusing 85% funding? I said, I'd have to refuse it. He said, well, he basically said, get out. I said, are there no other funds that I can apply for? He said, well, there's another grant, but you have to have money in place first. You can't apply for it with £5.50. That's not enough. So I walked out of the Belfast City Council offices and walked down Lindenhall Street thinking this is never going to happen. But within 2 weeks, I had a phone call saying that someone wanted to donate £6,500 anonymously to start the fund off. And I went back to see this guy, the arts officer in the council, and said, look, I've now got £6,505.50. He said, where did you get £6,500 in 2 weeks? I said, well, it's being donated anonymously. He said, why would someone donate £6,500 anonymously? I said, because they didn't want to be known. This is the head arts officer. I mean, is this being recorded? No. I'm not going to mention his name, but it begins with a B and ends with a Y. That's his first name. So he said, okay, that sounds really odd and slightly suspicious. I need to have proof that you have this money. I hadn't got the money yet. He said, you need to set up an account with a councillor and a business person as trustees. And when you come to me with a bank statement that says C.S. Lewis Sculpture Fund, £6,505.50, and you put that on my desk, then you can trigger off other funding. So they ended up giving us like 8,000 quid, which is a big, big help. The power company in Northern Ireland gave us £95. This is a multi-million-pound company. Gave us £95. I was absolutely disgusted, but I had to take it because we needed every penny. And I was telling somebody this earlier on today, I think it might have been a friend in Philadelphia, that since 1998, I have not paid a power bill on time. If you don't pay them where I come from, you get letters, we're going to take you to court, you could go to prison. And I've let the letter get to the court stage and on one occasion to the prison stage. But you can pay it really quickly with your phone now online, so I then quickly do it, and it really confuses them because they wonder what's going on here. I mean, I've never paid it on time. This is true for 25 years. My wife, freaks out. I just pile them up, and she says, have you paid that yet? I said, well, the court case letter hasn't come in yet. So let's just wait for that one. So I do that. I honestly do that every quarter and look forward to it. So this sculpture came through subscription. And another company company donated to it was a Belfast tea company called Punjana, who make this beautiful tea. And I've been drinking Punjana tea since 1998 for 25 years. I'm mentioning it in talks like this. And I'd like to think that I've paid them back all that donation that they've made, maybe several times over. But that was a big thing. The only people who complained were a car company who gave, I think, £1,000. And I said, you'll get your name and everything on the back of the wardrobe. And they came to the unveiling, and there's a little list of names at the bottom of the wardrobe. They thought they were going to get like a big thing across the, that we're doing 0% finance on the Ford Fiesta. The offer ends next week, please come, and blah, blah, blah. So they were the only ones who really kicked up about that. This is the day the sculpture arrived on site. And this is a big day, and you'll see it's on this little, almost like rack, and that's so it can be adjusted. You'll see there's bolts below the feet, and they can be adjusted so the level is right on the ground level. And you can see the stonemason who's starting to put in the paving. Now, this paving's been replaced because 18 years after the sculpture, Belfast City Council decided, let's do some C.S. Lewis sculptures behind this sculpture. And they put up £3 million to do this sculpture park behind my sculpture, and wanted to move, well, it's not my sculpture, it's the people's sculpture, wanted to move my sculpture into the middle of it. And I said, look, you're not moving it, it's staying, because it's outside a little library. And the reason for that was to encourage children to go to the library and to read and things like that. And they wanted to move it. And I said, if you move it, I'm removing the sculpture. I'm taking it. Because technically I still have ownership of it in terms of copyright and things like that. And the guy said, well, where are you going to take it to? I said, well, I know that there's a university in America who'd be very happy to, to have this. So anyway, it stayed there. So that was the original piece, I think, was put in place. And this was done 2 days before the unveiling. So I left a day's gap in between in case something went wrong. So this was a big moment for me, putting this in place. And it was in a very tough area of East Belfast. This was the first cultural deposit in that area. And it was a big thing. And when I was putting that in place, it was sort of a wet, sort of windy day. This lady walked past with 2 bags of shopping, like a real Belfast lady. And she says, they'll burn that wardrobe in a week. That wardrobe will be burnt in a week. I said, it's not wood, it's bronze. It'll be burnt in a week. So I thought there are people out there with the blessed gift of discouragement. And the first interaction I've had, and this has taken like over almost 2 years to get to this stage, is that we'll burn it in a week. And then another guy comes up to me, right up to my face, and said, why are you putting a sculpture up to Lewis Carroll in East Belfast? I said, it's not Lewis Carroll, it's C.S. Lewis. What's Lewis Carroll got to do with East Belfast? I said, I thought, this is not good. These are adults. Then I, later on, about like an hour and a half later, I felt this tugging at my coat. I turned around, there was these 3 little kids on their way home from school. Mister, is this to do with C.S. Lewis? I said, yeah. We love him. We're reading his book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. What's that chair for? I said, well, that chair is for children to sit on so they can be transported through the imagination of Lewis into Narnia. Can we be the first ones to sit in the chair? I said, yeah, go ahead, sit in the chair. And there they are. I had a camera, and I took a photograph of them, and they're about 9, 10-year-old. So that's 25 years ago. So they'd be like, not very good at maths, but they'd be about 35. And I'd love to try and trace those little girls and bring them back and sit on. And they got it. And I knew when they got it, it worked. Adults don't get it always, but the kids got it like that. And they expressed their love for Lewis and that they were interacting with his work and that they loved him and they loved his work. And that really touched my heart. And I thought, well, if it works for the kids, that's great, you know, and the adults can follow on. They were just 2 odd people who had to walk along, unfortunately for me, but made all the better by these 3 little girls, you know, who really touched my heart. So that was a big moment for me, a big moment of grace exchange, where these kids acknowledged the working of it. And it was another kid their age who'd written C.S. Lewis in 1961. So these are just some shots of the sculpture. Yeah, they call it C.S. Lewis Square now. After they put all those sculptures behind, spent £3 million on it. And I wrote to the Tourist Board in Northern Ireland, which is the government body that finances tourism. Could you donate £2,000 to the sculpture? And I got this 1-paragraph letter back, well, like 3 lines. Thank you for your application, but unfortunately we don't have funding for sculpture. I thought, you idiots, you know. And then when the movie came out, but maybe I'm sure it's 20 years ago now, or not 20, but maybe 10 years ago, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Tourist Board wanted permission to photograph this and promote it. And I really made them wait like a long time, even longer than the power company. Had to wait to get paid and reluctantly give them permission. I didn't take any money from them when I wanted them to use it to promote East Belfast. That's the new piece. I think it's there now. And then this new title of C.S. Lewis Square, which is good. And there's like 10 other sculptures behind that. I didn't get involved in that. I knew that this was the best I could do. I couldn't do any better than this. And that was my thing. So I didn't apply for the other sculptures. A sculptor did get the job, and it was like a really highly priced job. And I think the sculptures could be better. I'm not maybe being too critical. But I think they could have been better. But that's just me. So here's the back of the wardrobe. There's the letter in bronze. This is actually the names, and you'll see a dove at the top there, and that is the person who made that donation anonymously, who I still don't know who it is to this day. And that's my daughter, who's now 22. The first day she came to see it, and she was really disappointed that she can get into Narnia. Because not far from there, it was quite a tough area. It's all cultured out now and hip. But there were like winos used to sit and drink near the sculpture. And I thought, if any of those winos try to get into Narnia, try and get through that wardrobe door and in. So I welded the inside of the door like a panel so nobody could get into it, because it would just be a nightmare if a drunk got stuck inside Narnia. How are you going to get them out? Who would you send in? Get them out. So she was really disappointed. Dad, why can't I not get into Narnia? I said, it's a long story. So that was a big day for me that she came to see it. So you can see all the list of the different people there. There's the NIE, or the Northern Ireland Electricity Company. They're the people who give £95. Yeah. So this is a quotation from Lewis. This is precisely what Christianity is about. This world is a great sculptor's shop. We are the statues, and there's a rumour going around the shop that some of us are someday going to come to life. And another shot taken by a friend. And then these are some projects I did with kids. It's really important to connect with kids and to interact with kids. We shouldn't undermine the intelligence and the creativity of children, and the importance of how we can put grace into their lives, whether that's our own children or children that we teach in school or Sunday school or in church. It's really important that we have to think about how we connect with our young people and how we can inspire them, how we can lead them, direct them, how we can be examples to them, how we can be the verse in front of them. That's really, really important. It's a beautiful quotation. You would not have called me unless I had been calling you, said the lion. So just to finish off, in Surprised by Joy, Lewis talked about his conversion experience, and he laid it out very carefully about his journey to faith and the importance of that journey. And the challenge that we have to consider tonight, today, tomorrow, is this whole idea of grace exchange. And the question is not, as I said earlier, what we are, but what are we becoming, or as grace receivers. And Francis Schaeffer said this, it's really profound, it's beautiful. No work of art is more important than the Christian's life. And every Christian is called to be an artist in this sense. The Christian's life is to be a thing of truth and also a thing of beauty in the midst of a lost and despairing world. No work of art is more important than the Christian's life. And every Christian is called to be an artist in this sense. The Christian's life is to be a thing of truth and also a thing of beauty in the midst of a lost and despairing world. So on the 22nd of November 1963 was not the day that C.S. Lewis died. It was the day when he began to truly live. It was the day he moved further up and further in to the new country, to be truly surprised by joy through grace and experience the eternal beauty he had always yearned for, to be fully in the company of Christ, his Redeemer, who had sought him. The grace exchange of C.S. Lewis still impacts us today. At the conclusion of his book, The Last Battle, we read these words, and for us, this is the end of all the stories, and we can truly say they lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All of their life in this world and all of their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. Now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. And Lewis says there are far, far greater things ahead than any we leave behind. And we have to consider these things. Each of us in this room have an influence. Each of us, if we're believers, have an influence. And if you're here tonight and maybe you're not sure about your position in faith, I brought some little booklets along about the conversion of C.S. Lewis that a friend of mine wrote. They're beautiful. Many years ago, I put one of these in the back of a portrait that was being presented to the now King Charles when he was the Prince of Wales. And he read it. And he wrote me a 4-page letter and said, I found the booklet utterly riveting. I will now go out and buy all the books by C.S. Lewis that I haven't read and re-educate myself. And that had a really amazing impact. And this, again, was Grace Exchange. A friend of mine wrote this, and like thousands of these have been taken up, and I'd recommend it. If you know someone who's not a believer, or if you're a bit confused about your faith or not sure about your faith tonight, please take one of these and have a look at it. It's really beautifully put together, and I would encourage you. They're just sitting over there. There's a few. Or if you know somebody who's interested in Lewis and maybe not a believer and you wanted to pass this on, please do it. So before Kim comes, I'm just going to close in prayer, if that's okay. Sorry, I'm going to close in prayer. Okay. Let us pray. You are a loving, giving God. We are in need of rescue. Grace is true rescue. Grace liberates our identity. Grace enables us to be Christ-like. Grace brings faith. Help us on our weakness. Help those of us who have turned aside to return. Noticing, seeing with the soul of the eye leads to wonder and leads to worship. Lord, help me to notice you and your works. May the wonders of your works produce the heart of responsive worship in my life, in our lives. Father, God, increase our sense of wonder. Increase our sense of wonder. Help us each to live out your grace in front of others, all within our unique individual communities of influence. Help us to live each day to the full faithfully. Help us to surrender. Help us to give ourselves away to others. Help us through your grace to love the lost, proclaiming Christ through word, practice, and action. Thank you for the refuge and the rest that we find in your grace. In Christ's name, amen.
Just for a few minutes, we'll have some questions. Ross, thank you so much. That was just so beautiful. Not only, yeah, indeed, getting to know about the sculpture, but also just a beautiful charge to us tonight. And a couple of the things I just thought would be great to start with is you found inspiration by being curious and by noticing things and paying attention. Help us, give us some tips. How can we do that? We have songwriters, we have writers of all kinds, we have visual artists, all types of artists here. Where do we start paying attention?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A friend asked that question this morning. I mean, just by waking up to a new day, opening your eyes, seeing the light, knowing that you have one more day. I mean, that's basically what we have, that time frame, one more day. And this idea of becoming what we should become. I mean, there's so much inspiration around. I feel almost, I don't know, like derelict sometimes because I've neglected so much of the inspiration that I see day by day and have not been able to connect into it in a way that I feel happy with. And I've been painting and longer than I've been sculpting, and I find it very difficult to be content with things because that sense of wonder, which is really important to any creative person, we're all creative people, whether you're a musician, writer, poet, as a mother you're creative, as a father, I said this earlier on, there's no real hierarchy. Being creative is something that as believers, it should be part of our internal sat-nav. It should be part of our DNA. So that should be an instinctive thing.
Right.
And if you're an artist or a composer, writer, whatever, you have even more of a responsibility to that because you're looking at things to interpret them for others. And that's a big responsibility to do that well.
Yeah. Everybody take notes on that one, I hope. Doing work with excellence. That was another thing that I was thinking about when you were raising funds for the sculpture. I mean, my goodness, what a huge challenge to feel the calling to do this sculpture and that this is something you really wanted to do. And then the huge challenge of raising enough money to do it and then to do it with excellence. I mean, I think that, I don't know, did you have a community around you that helped you keep going? Was it tempting at some point to go, okay, 6,000 pounds is enough. I'll just do a 6,000 pound sculpture.
Yeah, that would be very small.
Yes.
I mean, you couldn't even do a chair. I mean, the chair cost about 6,000 bucks.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
So a tabletop.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a good point. But again, it was that grace exchange in that letter that really did something to me, as it did to that young kid, changed her life. And I felt really driven by it. Now, at that time, I'd not been long back from university to my local church, and they still view me with a high amount of suspicion. Being creative and being involved in the church is not really something that usually happens.
well,
I'm being humorous. So I didn't have a lot of contact with other creative people. And Keith, I tried to encourage.
Keith Getty is who he's referring to, one of his lifelong friends.
I tried to encourage Keith when he was starting out. And Keith started out with zero, zilch. He had nothing, nothing. Yeah, I mean, he didn't have anything. He had dreams and he had ambition, and that was good. And when we see that in younger people, that we should be mentoring, we need to encourage that, because that's so many young people don't even have any ambition today, or a dream. And a dream's an important thing, but a dream has to have a goal attached to it, because if it doesn't have a goal attached to it, it just remains a dream.
Right.
So we encouraged each other, and I got through Douglas Gresham, because of Keith's connection, and I made lots of connections for Keith, and so we put this weekend together on the centenary of Lewis's birth, where I unveiled the sculpture on the actual centenary, and that was a Friday, and then on the Saturday night, Keith did the concert, and we brought.
So he did write the musical.
Oh yeah, I mean the musical called Jack, and he made Douglas Gresham the chief narrator as well.
Okay.
So, but that brought Belfast alive that weekend. We didn't realise the impact it would have. I didn't realise the impact that sculpture would have. And there's been moments through the years where I've been at that sculpture and things have happened. I'm not trying to get into some kind of mystical cosmic thing, but I will tell you one story that really impacted my life. I had a young friend who went off to be a minister in New Zealand. He mentored me. He was about 10 years older than me when I was just starting out, because I thought I wanted to be going into the ministry, and he soon put an end to that by taking me on visitations and things like that.
Visitations.
So anyway, he wanted to come back to visit Northern Ireland and bring his wife with him. He was newly married, and his wife is a big C.S. Lewis fan.
Yeah.
And he said, I want to bring my wife to see a sculpture. I want you to tour us around the sculpture. I said, Colin, I'm not going to. Why would? Just go and look at it. No, I want you to be there so you can explain to my wife, Leslie, about what this is all about. I said, look, somebody's going to drive past in the car and see me and think, there's that guy again, hanging around a sculpture, sitting on the chair again, all that kind of stuff. Because that did happen a few times, just coincidentally. So anyway, I said, okay, I'll meet you there at 8 o'clock. And I thought 8 o'clock at night was an August evening, the weather was really nice and there was nobody around. And he turned up at 8 o'clock and I was there. And at 2 minutes past 8, it was about 2 minutes past 8, around the corner from the back of the library came a mother with two kids, a little boy and a little girl. And around the base of the sculpture, it says C.S. Lewis, writer, scholar, Christian, date of birth 1898, date of rebirth 1931. So the little girl is running around the sculpture and she's reading this. And she says, Mommy, what does rebirth mean?
Wow.
And so my minister friend says, you need to go and talk to that kid. I said, I'm not going to talk to that kid. He says, you need to go and talk to that kid. I said, first of all, they're going to think I'm weird. And why would I be here at this time of night hanging around my sculpture? So he said, you need to go and talk to the kid. So I sort of like eased my way over to the mother. I said, look, I hope you don't mind me intruding, but actually,
I put that on there.
I did the sculpture. And before I could even finish the sentence, the mum said, this man will explain what rebirth means. And so this little kid runs up to me and she's like, and I'm thinking, I have to be very careful here how I explain this.
Yeah.
And I talked about the idea of when we're born, we don't have a choice in our parents. And this idea of rebirth is a new birth, and that we can find that in Christ. And that's something we can search for while being searched for by Christ. And this new beginning, a new life, a new birth. And I went, is that okay? And the little kid went, and then she started running around again. And that was one of the biggest moments of my life. And if that sculpture had been put in place just for that moment, it would have been worth it. And I didn't realize the power that things like that can have, especially if they've got a deep spiritual dimension to it. And that really taught me a big lesson.
It's so beautiful. We've been to see the sculpture and the three-dimensional and the 360, all different angles of it, that there's an impact from every angle. But the title is so appropriate, The Searcher. Is it exactly that, the search for Christ?
Yeah, it's that. When we were trying to raise money for the sculpture, Keith and I joined the C.S. Lewis Centenary group, who were a bunch, this is being recorded, isn't it? Yeah. Who were a bunch of anoraks who knew everything about C.S. Lewis. They knew what sort of patches he had on his coats. Like they were in the...
Which pipes he had.
Yeah, all this kind of stuff. And I was in the meeting, I thought, these guys are really eccentric. What am I actually doing here? And they then had a discussion about how Lewis should look, which Lewis they wanted. Now, they hadn't raised any money or put any money towards anything. Me and Keith joined the C.S. Lewis Centenary group, hoping that they were going to finance the musical and the sculpture. Yeah. And then I found out within an hour they had no money.
They had no money,
and I had to raise money for them. Yeah, by selling a painting to finance a brochure that they didn't have the money to print.
Oh my gosh.
No offense if you're listening in. But
it's just how things are.
Yeah, so what was the question?
Searcher?
Yeah. So they were having this debate, we want the young Lewis, we want the old Lewis, we want the fat Lewis, we want the thin Lewis, and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, I'm not getting involved in this. So I said, the sculpture's going to be based on Diggory Kirk. And Diggory Kirk's, so nobody actually knew what he looked like. And they were all like, whoa, oh, yeah, okay. I said, because Diggory Kirk was Lewis's alter ego. Because in The Magician's Nephew, Diggory Kirk's given an apple to bring back to his mother, who's got cancer. And Aslan says, if you eat the apple, this will cure your mother. In real life, Lewis's mother died when he was 9 of cancer. He couldn't save her when he was 9, but in the book, he could redeem her and save her by allowing Aslan to give him the apple. So Diggory Kirk is Lewis's alter ego. And that's how I got past those guys.
Right.
And it's based on the young Lewis, not long after, he was quite a handsome young man. And there's some brilliant photographs of him when he came back from the First World War. And it's based around that time. And also this idea of searching, seeking, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And that wardrobe.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, the wardrobe.
Metaphor, that was what the metaphor was.
I didn't, at the time, because you're involved in that in the mechanics, you lose sometimes sight of the vision. But I have caught myself by surprise sometimes when I've been driving past that particular site and just glanced and forgotten that the sculpture was there, but saw it for the first time in a microsecond and thought, well, that looks okay. That works. And you don't always appreciate that as an artist. Sometimes, what you're doing, does it work? Or you have to leave it for a while and come back to it. So I would say that's probably one of the maybe 3 or 4 things in my life that I've done that work.
And it was your first sculpture?
It was my second sculpture.
My
first sculpture was for a brewing company called Bass, who brewed beer, and I convinced them I could do a sculpture, and they weirdly gave me the commission. I didn't know anything about sculpture. I had to go and learn very quickly. I got my brother to sit in a barrel for 2 months while I sketched him, because it was a Cooper. And I found the experience of working with Bass, even though I didn't drink the product, very sobering. So
okay.
That was a
dad. He is a dad.
That was a learning curve. So that I wouldn't have done a sculpture if I hadn't done that first sculpture.
Yeah.
I might have done a portrait of Lewis. I wouldn't have thought about doing a sculpture.
Yeah.
So that was like a preparation. a lead into that.
Which that's another great observation too for artists, the journey that it is. You know, the first one's not always it, but you have to have a first one to get to it.
Yeah.
How about some questions? I know that you guys have to have some curiosity about Ross and about what he's done or his process or his accent. Yeah.
I want to know, I guess, about the process of sculpting in bronze. What is that?
It is.
Yeah, people think that it's a big giant block of bronze that you chisel out, but it's not. You know, it's called the lost wax process, which is an ancient process that the Chinese invented, but the Greeks mastered. And I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I'm pretty, believe it or not, I am sort of quite dumb. And I went to meet this sculptor guy, an older guy, and in an afternoon he taught me some really simple techniques. And so you build an armature, you can make it from wood, wire, you can build it up in wax, or you can build it up in clay, you can use polystyrene, you know. So because I was a painter, you know, I built it up and then started to paint the wax on. You know, so I've helped form part of the figure by painting the wax on. So the wax is like, I mean, it's as hard as that, you know, like metal. So you boil it in a saucepan, like until it's at the level of cooking fat. And you have to use like a hog's hair brush, because if you use a synthetic brush, once you put it in, it just melts. So I started to work it like that and paint it and work it up. I didn't really know a lot about sculpting. I look at that sometimes and think, you know, how did that happen? You know, in my fumbling stupidity, that happened. And that was a big thing. It was a big learning curve. I've done lots of sculptures since then, but each one I find still difficult to do.
But do you do it to size, or do you start with small and then work your way up?
If it's a public commission that you're applying for, you have to tender for these things, and it's like a lot of competition. So you have to submit ideas. When you do something like that, you have control, and I had control. If the council had got too heavily involved in that, they would have tried to control me, and they would have tried to soften down the whole faith element, all that kind of stuff. So I didn't want that. And there's been a few other projects. Like recently, I did a sculpture of Amy Carmichael as a child, and this idea of the encouragement she received from her parents, and how she was encouraged to believe in prayer and to pray. And that's outside a church in Northern Ireland, where they have a worldwide missionary convention. And it's her as a 9-year-old kid, and she's got a little hat on, and she's looking out into the future of her life. She's holding a book in her hand. It's not a Bible or a hymn book. It's a diary of her life, as yet unwritten, but written by God, because she would go on to change so many lives and impact so many lives. So when you have that kind of creative control, the process thing almost becomes secondary. The inspiration is really important. And process thing you can get a hold of. You can, through practice, you can get better. So it's basically, you make a life-size model. Like when I did the figure sitting on the barrel, I don't have a photograph of it there, with a big cloth cap, I had to go to a foundry to get it cast in Dublin. So I made the model. I had a Saab 900 hatchback, which was a really beautiful car. They don't make them like that anymore. This was 1996, and the Troubles were still yearning around the border areas. And I thought, I need to take this figure to Dublin. So I made the figure so it came apart at the waist. I put the top part of the figure in the passenger seat with a seatbelt on. And I put the legs in the back seat. And then I put the barrel in the hatchback. And I left my house at 5 o'clock in the morning thinking, I'll get through the border before there's any security people there. And so, like, there's 2 cars behind me. They're obviously going to Dublin as well, very early in the morning. And I get to the border and there's a checkpoint, like a police checkpoint. Got the red light. And I'm in a car with, like, a torso.
Half a man.
Seriously, a torso of a figure with a cloth cap on, and his legs in the back seat, and a barrel in the hatchback. And I come up to the policeman and I put the window down like that. And he says, "Where are you going?" I said, "We're going to Dublin." And he shines a torch in the figures. He has a seatbelt on. I couldn't turn the heater on in the car because of the wax. It was freezing. And so he says, "Away you go." And I thought, from a security point of view, that's frightening. Yeah, because that could have been Semtex. Could have been explosives. Yeah.
It'd be a lot of Semtex.
So he said, away you go. So I thought, from a security point of view, that's frightening, but from an artistic point of view, that's convincing. So then over the border, there was a Republican checkpoint. In the Republic, there was a checkpoint by the Garda, the police force, and they just waved at both of us. So I learned a lot from that process. I take it to the foundry, we make then these latex molds of the figure, then you make waxes, and you put those waxes into ceramic, like clay, and like a soft, almost like yogurt type ceramic. You fire that up, you have channels onto it. So when you fire it up in a kiln, the cavity, the wax melts out, and you've got a cavity inside the ceramic that you can use then to pour the bronze into. So that's why it's called the lost wax process, because the wax melts away from the inside.
Beautiful.
That's a very simple version of the thing. It took about 6 months to do that in the foundry.
Must be so, I mean, once it leaves your hands, you must just...
Well, you don't take anything to the foundry. I learned this very early on. And I would spend more time looking at a sculpture than making it. Because if you get an angle wrong and that's cast, that cannot be changed.
That's it.
And even if you have to change something, I remember something happened with an eye that was not right. And it took about 5 hours just to change it a little bit, to re-weld it, to chase it down, and to get the patina back on. It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
So I learned very early on, do not take anything to the foundry until you're absolutely happy with it. So I would sit and look at all the angles to make sure everything's correct. Because if that's cast and it's wrong, it's a nightmare.
So your studies, did you study anatomy deeply? Obviously, that was a big thing for you.
I'd like to say yes. But,
Okay, then you can just say yes if you'd like.
I think that was just observation. Like that first sculpture was my brother sitting on a barrel. I mean, I had to pay him to sit on the barrel.
Only a brother, right?
Yeah, it was at the back of my mum's house, and like we would start early in the morning. The postman would be going past, thinking, "What are those guys at? What are guys sitting in a barrel for?" He's been sitting in that barrel for the last week. And I would pay my brother to model on the barrel. So I did all these sketches, and I had to convince Bass, the brewers, that I could do this sculpture. So I had to produce these ideas, and Bass were quite coy. They didn't want to promote the idea of alcohol being a downer thing, because alcohol has its problems, and people have problems with it. So they wanted to promote this sort of almost mystical figure of the guys who made the barrels. They liked that idea. So when I convinced them of that and showed the drawings, then I had to go and make it.
It's an interesting process, I think, though, to see the artist and the confidence you have to have as an artist. You have to believe in what you want to do. You can't just sit home and go, well, I'm a really good artist, and surely somebody will find me and make it happen for me. I mean, you have had to believe in what you do and go sell it and make it happen. And I think we as artists want to think that it's just going to happen for us. You know, somebody will come and help us make it happen. And you have done the hard work of going out there and showing them, I can do this, give me a shot.
Well, I mean, I studied fine art at university. That just gave me more time. It didn't really, I learned a few technical things. I did a postgrad at Chelsea School of Art, a master's degree there. That gave me more time in the studio. No one at any of those universities taught me what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
How are you going to sell your work? How are you going to market yourself?
Right.
How are you going to do your accounts? How are you going to pay your taxes? How are you going to be honest about that?
And next we'll have Ed Nash here to help us figure all that out too.
So they don't teach those things at university, and they should do that, especially the fine art.
It's a lot of it.
Yeah.
It's a
And if you're a
lot of
writer or a poet as well, it's difficult. Shakespeare didn't become known by putting his plays in a drawer and keeping them private.
Right.
You know, you have to get it out there and you have to share it.
And be confident you have to find that place between humility and confidence that is appropriate, to be confident in who God made you and what you do, and appropriate to your skill level.
And that doesn't always work the way it should. I've had a lot of knockbacks, and a lot of people take advantage of me in terms of finance and galleries. No offense to any gallery people in here tonight, but I'm just like taking a list off here.
We'll go back and delete a lot of this.
So I've met basically 2 art dealers in my life who are passionate about art and love it. One of them was so eccentric that he wouldn't sell the art. And I just knew it wasn't going to last long. The gallery, he just wanted to sit and look at it. It was all beautiful stuff. And the other guy was just so enthusiastic and exciting. So most of the other art dealers I've met it could be potatoes. You know, if it was something it was selling, they were selling it. And I don't mean any offense to anybody here who is involved in the art business, because there are people who are pretty dedicated to it and do it really well. And artists need people like that to encourage them and be their agents as well.
Anybody else? A couple more questions. Yes, Sarah.
My question is about the abundance of information that is available today. Do you have any ideas on balancing between taking in things that promote your creativity and taking in things that distract you from your own creativity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not good at promoting my work. I mean, a friend of mine set a website up because I've been doing like more recently like lots of talks and things like that. He said you need to get because I hadn't updated my website for 12 years. I just didn't have the time, and yet that's a very important tool. It's something that you need to address, and any young artist or any artist here tonight, you know, needs to use those outlets to promote their work in the right kind of way. That's a really important question. I mean, I look at things online a lot. I mean, I look at paintings a lot to see what's happening. And I could look at 1,000 paintings maybe in a few days, and I might be stopped by 1 or 2. And when I'm stopped by that 1 or 2, I think, why is that painting speaking to me? You know, what's getting through, even just a backlit screen, that's affecting me about that piece of work? Because there's thousands of people out there making paintings. And thousands, I mean, there was a very famous British artist called Frank Oibach, who once said, there's no point in getting up in the morning and just making another painting. You know, there are millions of people doing that. It's about taking that stage further. And you look at like someone like Vincent van Gogh, who did that, you know, in obscurity, who died penniless, who was a suicide, who had mental health issues, but who never gave up. Well, until he couldn't keep going any longer. But he was the father of modern art, created in the last 2 years of life some of the most amazing works. You go to Amsterdam tomorrow, there'll be a queue of people around the block waiting to get into the Van Gogh Museum, because there's something in that work that speaks. And as artists and as believers, we have a responsibility to try and do that in whatever way we can, at whatever level we can. Vincent probably never realized the impact he would have. And again, it was somebody who was promoting his work. The equivalent of social media was his sister-in-law, Joanna, Theo's wife. Theo died 6 months after Vincent. Joanna catalogued all the letters, had them published in 1914. An young American writer called Irving Stone bought a book of those letters, based a book called Lust for Life on the letters. That was made into a movie in 1957 with Kirk Douglas, Anthony Quinn, directed by Vincente Minnelli. He took him on location to the actual places where Van Gogh painted, went way over time, way over budget. The Hollywood moguls couldn't find him because communication in those days was very rare, but the movie is amazing. Yeah. It's really powerful. And the other movie I'd recommend on Vincent van Gogh was recently made by Julian Schnabel called At Eternity's Gate. And it's based on a painting of a man in torment and prayer. Mm-hmm. So
Vincent and Theo is good too. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
Vincent and Theo.
So how you put things out and how you see things are almost like equally important, because you need to receive information as well. And we can't go to all the museums we'd like to around the world, but we can look at things that are in those museums, and we can look at other artists' work that are inspiring. And there are artists out there who are inspiring. And that's part of our duty as an artist, whatever, as a person, as a Christian, you know, you need to be inspiring. You don't need to bore people. There's people out there who'll bore you for for nothing, you know. There are people even at church who have the blessed gift of discouragement.
That's right. That's right.
Who can discourage you by a look, you know, just by a look. I remember when I was a young Christian in the car park of my church, I used to wave at everybody driving out, and they were like, "What the?" You know. So we need to encourage those people around us by being encouragers. Okay. That's important.
And Sarah, my own practice, I spend a certain amount of time looking, reading, taking in, but I try to set an amount of time and then balance that by how much I put in my own practice. So I just try to balance how many hours. You know, if I discover that, oh my gosh, this week all I've done is take in and I haven't put anything out, then I know that I'm out of balance. So I don't know if that speaks to a little bit of what you're talking about, because sometimes I've found that I'm so busy taking in from so many different directions. And I also have to watch that I'm taking in good, only what's really excellent, because every once in a while I realize I've been taking in some stuff that's just on Instagram. Just because it was there, it was the next thing. And suddenly 30 minutes later, I've seen a lot of stuff and none of it was worth my time. But yeah, so it's just, I guess, a self-discipline of setting up a schedule for me as to how much I take in and then balance that with how much I'm then putting back out. Anybody else? Some other question? Yes, okay. Madeline?
Yes. I love to write, and I've seen a lot of advice to writers is like, write every day, whether you feel like it or not, whether you feel inspired or not, just write, because you have to like get all of the junk out to be able to get to what you're actually inspired by, or something along that line. So what's kind of your opinion on that kind of creative process?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the idea of making things, and doing things is really important. I mean, I try to paint every day. I don't always get long bursts at it, but I try to do it every day. And I've got lots of other stuff I have to do that you get caught up in. I think the practice of doing it, is really important. It may not always be a good day, but it's been a day where you've written something, so that practice of you doing is one of the key elements. If you're not doing it, it's not going to happen. And it may not happen every day. But like you think about someone like John Keats, who died at the age of 24. He'd written some of the greatest poems in the English language before he died of tuberculosis in Rome. What would have happened if he'd lived to he was 40 or 50? But he'd written some of the greatest poems in English language because he did it. He did it. And no one's going to see how good a writer you are if you don't do it. And there will be days when you don't feel like doing this, that, and the other, and you have to maybe go and do something different. But I would say to you, you must keep writing, and you should try and do it every day. I'm not saying you have to do it for like 5 hours a day,
Right.
but you need to do it. And I'm sure someone like Ed and Kim would agree that the idea of practice is so important. And out of practice can come discovery. Even in my stupidity, I've discovered things through the practice, and I'm still learning. I mean, I've still got so much to learn. I know, to be honest, I know very little. And I've been a slipping glimpser for most of my life, fumbling my way forward. But that's because of practice. Because even in my stupidity, I have the wit to do that.
It's much like our spiritual disciplines too, I think.
Yeah.
Being in the Word every day, and you think you're not really getting anything until you realize you've been doing this for so long and it's become a part of you. Same thing with your craft. Joel, did you have your hand? Yeah.
What do you do about writer's block or creative block?
I try and if that's really bad, then sometimes I just go for a coffee. But it's never that really bad, but it's always sometimes a good excuse to go for a coffee or a nice soup. There's a place not far from me that makes really nice soup. But
And pottery.
yeah, they do pottery as well. And I would say that you just need to keep doing it. I mean, that's, how do you become good at prayer? You pray. You pray. And you work, and okay, you're going to get blocked sometimes. Things are not going to go the way, and you may have started something that starts off brilliant, and then you make a mess. I've done that so many times, and I used to destroy work. I used to tear it up, bin it, and then I remember I did this big drawing of a horse called Molly Longlegs, and it wasn't going well. It was massive, and I crumpled it up and put it in the bin. And because of my studio, I don't tally it up very often. A year later, that bin was still not emptied. And I thought, I wonder what size that paper was, because I wanted to order some more paper. It was massive. It's about 60 inches by 54 inches. So I got this crumpled up drawing out, and I stapled it to like a big board on the wall to flatten it out. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, that looks okay. If I did a bit more work, that could be something. So that drawing was a breakthrough. It was a mixed media drawing. It was a breakthrough for me. It was in an exhibition. I did a blue one, a red one, and a black one. And it was way back, but it was a turning point for me as an artist, where I'd redeemed something that was I consider rubbish, but it wasn't. I just couldn't see it properly. So sometimes you have to put things away. If you're working on a poem or a piece of work, and you're not sure about it, don't necessarily tear it up, or don't delete it from your computer, but keep it. And you must keep pushing against the block. There's no other way you're going to get around it. And do not let yourself become too sentimental about being blocked, because sometimes we can all be a bit sentimental about that and get a bit, like sad for ourselves that we're blocked. So it's best to sort of keep pushing against the block, and get through it. And it's that idea of practice again, about you doing it. You need to do it, and the more you do it, the better you'll get.
Rainer Rilke, the poet, said, you have to just not worry. The tree doesn't worry that its sap won't come. In its season, it comes. And that's the way the creative life is, that you get to these points and you think, oh, it's never going to come again. It's never going to come again. It'll come. It's just not the season. Just keep growing and pushing, and it will come again. And that, I think, when we get so frightened and freeze up, sometimes for me, it's go in the studio and wash all the brushes, go and clean up the paints, straighten things up, act like you're a painter. Maybe don't go and start drawing or something. Maybe check your supplies, order them, do those things that it smells like I'm a painter, maybe order the things and live like it, and it will come again,
The other thing I would say is you need to have a circle of friends who are like-minded, that you can talk these things through. I have maybe 2 or 3 friends back home that I would confide in, or I know I could talk to and they'd understand. And sometimes it's hard for even our family to understand what you're doing. Like my mum and dad didn't really understand what I was doing when I was a kid starting out. I was so enthusiastic about art. For me to get into university was like playing for Manchester United in the 1968 European Cup final against Benfica, against Eusebio, and being George Best's wingman. So I was so excited about going to university. My mum worked in a factory near my university. She started at 7:30 in the morning. I used to get her to drop me off at 7:15. Now, you may think that's a bit OCD, but I was so enthusiastic because I had a younger brother who was a coal merchant, who carried bags of coal every day, winter, summer, whatever, mainly in the winter time, in snow and frost. And I remember him getting up really early, going out. And I thought, all I have to do is go to college and lift a brush. I just had to lift a brush. And so in my first year at college, my mum dropped me off before she was going to work. And I was in before the cleaners came. And I just couldn't believe I was there. And I could do this all day, like 5 days a week. And friends were turning in 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And you just think, what planet are they on? I don't know whatever happened to those people. I didn't ever hear anything of them again. So, yeah, that would be a shocking revelation. So you need to have friends that you can confide in. You need to have people you can talk to, and that you trust, and that you can show things to. And what do you think of this? Or that's important. And I'm quite interested in literature and poetry, and I've got quite a lot of poet friends, young writers, and some of them are doing really well. And sometimes all somebody needs is just a little bit of encouragement, because encouragement is oxygen to your soul.
Yeah. And maybe we hope that through this group we'll meet a few of like-minded people. Maybe you'll go out for coffee with someone, and through the next year find some of that group and that companionship here. So I hope that this evening has been the beginning of something for us. Through the year, we'll be having more of these. We're hoping for a quarterly gathering, but maybe more. And we'll see what gets birthed from these things. Certainly, Ross has been a wonderful start for us. So thank you, Ross. We appreciate that so much.